The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Book Club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana and I am your host. And I hope that you have had a wonderful start to Ramadan, inshallah. I know it's always a time to make big and beautiful intentions. Hopefully throughout this month and during the show will be an opportunity for you to really have time to see what time you have for reading, really, and how we're able to reconnect with our faith, because always this month is really, really good opportunity if throughout the year we've been feeling maybe a little bit lost or kind of having this sense that, you know, we need to bring our life kind of back on track. It's always a good way to do it during this month, inshallah, and no better way than having maybe a sense of what you would like to read or what how you'd like to spend your time. So I'm really, really excited to have a wonderful guest on the show. We have writer Mariya bint Rehan, and she is an amazing person. I did interview Mariya, I think sometime last year maybe, and she's written some really interesting, insightful, thoughtful pieces of work. And I always take much benefit from. So inshallah, we are going to talk a little bit about to Mariya about how her Ramadan is going, what kind of intentions well, we both have actually, so I'll be sharing as well, and then we'll talk a little bit as well about some of the articles that and blogs that Mariya has written as well. But I'm firstly going to say Assalamu alaikum, Mariya.
Walaikum assalam, Imran. Jazakallah khair. That was a really lovely introduction, and likewise to you as well. Jazakallah khair for everything, and I'm always very inspired by everything you're doing equally.
Thank you, Jazakallah. That's very thoughtful and very kind for you to say. But today's show is definitely going to be about you. So I guess my first question really is, if we're just starting kind of because, you know, for Ramadan, how do you prepare for the month?
Okay, so I've got a bit of a confession here in that in terms of preparation, I am what some people could call quite lazy, in as far as I don't do much in terms of physical prep. So my feed is just absolutely full of like all this food that people are preparing, and even in the sense of like your physical sort of your physical worship, you know, getting ready to kind of like increasing your capacity for Quran and increasing, you know, your dhikr and things like that. And really, unfortunately for me, in the run-up to Ramadan, I don't do much of that. But what I do, and what is one of the things I love about the run-up to Ramadan itself, is I do really try to kind of spiritually realign myself, in the sense that I think when you're a mum and you know how much your time is going to be consumed by doing things for the kids and, you know, just generally household stuff, I think it's a really good time to renew your intentions and to really kind of contextualize what you're doing everything for. And that's what I love about Ramadan. It's like, it's such a special time of year. It's the time of year where you really acutely feel like Allah's presence in your life. And I love that the run up to Ramadan is, for me, all about that. It's all about understanding that, you know, Allah's made me human with the limitations that I have, with the limited hours that I have, with the limited capacity that I have. But that doesn't mean that what I'm doing isn't worship. You know, like the fact that I'm having to fill my time with all the things I do as a mum. I'm really sort of regrounding myself and really sort of reorienting myself and understanding that I'm doing all that for the sake of him and him alone. And I think that's what I really use the run up to Ramadan for, like really kind of recentering myself, really understanding my purpose, what I'm here for, and how everything I do in that month is ultimately for him, even if that isn't, you know, in the formal acts of worship. It's that intention and that kind of preparing myself mentally and spiritually for that.
Yeah, no, that's really kind of a lot actually that you've said, which is so fantastic, because I really like what you said about this idea of realignment and reorientation. And I know, you know, there's a lot of way, I guess, thinking about our iman, and obviously it will always fluctuate, but it's also this idea that it's kind of like a circle, and, you know, you always are able to come back to Allah, and, you know, there's never a time, no matter how, I guess, far gone that we might feel, you know, this idea of, of always having, I guess, the year to really, I guess, you know, like reflect and, like you said, realign with faith. So you kind of spoke, you mentioned something about purpose. So I guess, are there any, I know you said that I mean, you labeled yourself as perhaps being a bit lazy, which I don't believe even for a second. However, you're saying about purpose. So are there any particular intentions that you make for the month then? And that could be in any way, whether that's spiritually or, you know, if you set a certain target or, you know, yeah, I was just wondering what that might be.
Yeah, so like it's like what you said about you know, different stages of your life. And I think it's interesting because when I look back at every Ramadan, and you know, there's that famous hadith about, or there's that famous sort of adage in Islam where like we pray to reach the next Ramadan. And as you grow older, you sort of, I kind of milestone my life according to Ramadan. So that Ramadan was the first Ramadan I was pregnant. That Ramadan was the first Ramadan I had a child, and that was the first. And so with each year, my intentions and my sort of what I prioritize is different. And so, you know, so when I was pregnant with my first child, it was when I first started practicing as Muslim. I first started becoming a conscious Muslim, and I had this voracious appetite for learning, and I just wanted to absorb all this information. I was just absolutely in this phase of my life where I was just learning how to be like, I think there gets a point in your life where when you're born Muslim in particular, where you realize that Islam isn't a passive identity, it's an active endeavor. And that was really like my turning point. So that year my intentions were all about, I just wanted to do as much, like physically go to the masjid. I mean, at the time I didn't have kids, obviously I was pregnant with my first child, so I had the physical ability to do that as well. And I think now I'm at a stage in my life where I feel like my faith is being tested in different ways. And it's weird because, you know, when you're in a certain point in your life, you look to the horizon and you kind of, I always assume I'm going to be in a constant. So I always assume, okay, this year I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. So, you know, Ramadan will always be X, Y, and Z to me. But subhanAllah, it's amazing how each Ramadan has evolved and changed, and how each time I'm pulling on different parts of myself. Because I feel like that's what Ramadan's about, right? It's about really getting the best of yourself. Like really sorting through all of that sort of, all the minerals within you that are kind of pulling you down spiritually and making you kind of less, like the less better version of yourself. And so I feel like this Ramadan is one of the first Ramadans where I feel like I'm actually feel like I'm now part of a Muslim community. Like I see Muslims often and regularly. And so as before, certain like outward elements of my faith, like my hijab, would have been a test, i.e. wearing a hijab might be a test. Now I feel like I'm at a stage where like for me it's easier to keep my hijab on than it would be to say, like, so I feel like my faith is being tested in a different way. I'm kind of learning to repurpose and re-understand and sort of reorient myself and re-understand why I'm wearing hijab, because the social aspect of it is like locked down now. And now I'm like, okay, no, I have to rediscover hijab. I have to rediscover being a Muslim. I have to rediscover why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I've created a lifestyle for myself. It's embedded in my lifestyle. It's now about seeing that in a new light and sort of repurposing it and re-understanding it and appreciating it in a different way, I suppose. So I think that's what it's about. Like this year is all about sort of, and even like as you go older, I feel like you tend to kind of, as you start to establish yourself more, I feel like you get tested in different ways as well. So that there are smaller things that I want to kind of refine in my behavior and my attitude and my approach to life that I think that come with age as well. So I'm very conscious of all these sort of finer tuned things in my character. And I think that's what being a Muslim's about. And that's what I love about Islam. It's because, you know, the idea of Allah as omniscient, we really do center that in our life. So it is really about interrogating yourself from the inside out. And Ramadan is very much about that for me. It's about getting rid of like the smaller internal habits. Actually, when you look at them, they do impact your actions and your intentions in such a vast way. Like you wouldn't think it, but the smaller things that are part of your character really do impact and impress on your physical being in such a way, and your actions and your day-to-day life. So for me, it's very much about that this year. I'm really trying to kind of sort out my inner demons and kind of better myself in lots of different ways, inshallah.
Yeah, no, inshallah. No, thank you for sharing. And, you know, it's one of those things, like there is beauty in not seeing faith as something stagnant, right? Because, you know, we're always changing, like seasons change, we're changing. And, you know, what you said something there about kind of, it's an active endeavor. I mean, I really, really like that. And totally echo, I think, what you're saying about, specifically kind of being a visibly Muslim woman and what does hijab mean, and actually how much that's changed, like from me wearing it since, you know, I was kind of older teenager to now, and that whole journey. And I think, yeah, it's really, really healthy to actually be able to have those constant kind of questions and kind of reflections. So And I guess my next question really is that obviously you're a writer. You know, how does that play into then like do you do much writing during Ramadan, or how does that help you kind of reflect on your own faith as well, I guess?
I think as a writer, I remember early on in my like writing career, I guess you could call it. I remember someone posing this question to me about whether you write for yourself or other people. And I remember at the time feeling really like I think I've evolved. Like initially I was writing for myself, and then no, sorry, initially I felt I was writing for other people because I felt I had a point as a minoritized person to kind of to really assert myself and to kind of to make those points that may not be so publicly available because they are from a minoritized perspective, to make those, normalize them, and to kind of to give them some sort of shape and some meaning and some sort of weight in public life. And then it kind of evolved to know it's really a good way to refine my thoughts, right? But I think writing, like as I stand here today, when it comes to writing, it's not something that I spend time on during Ramadan, because for me Ramadan is really about like internal and like reflecting myself internally and perfecting myself internally. And I think our lives are so busy, it's so full of like outwards and you know, outwards displays of, you know, everything. And I feel like that's one thing Ramadan is one time I just want to be by myself, with myself spiritually. And I know that that's not always easy, like I said, when you're a mum and when you've got other sort of social responsibilities. So I think writing is one thing I definitely put on the back burner. It's like one of those things that I really do just want to focus on being the best of me. And I think inshallah that does impact your writing after Ramadan, because you come out a better version of yourself with better intentions and a clearer idea of your purpose and your sense of direction and what you want to do with, you know, with your words and with what you put out there in the world. So unfortunately for me, and I know loads of people journal, and I know writing's such a versatile tool. So I know that there are loads of writers out there that probably use it to the best of their ability during the month of Ramadan. But for me, it's very much like I need to sort myself out, like sort your own house out first kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really I think it's something important, isn't it? Just being able to kind of take stock and actually, you know, writing, it's a different outlet depending on, I guess, where you are as an individual. And, you know, in Ramadan, obviously, you can take, you know, many forms. And so how about obviously the writing, I guess, is one aspect. And how about reading? So are you able to have time to read during Ramadan, or is there a particular routine that maybe you have a bit of reading, a bit of writing, and you know all the other stuff? Because obviously you've got your career, but then you're also, you know, a mother. I mean, how are you juggling all those things?
So with reading, and I feel like, so when I was kind of reflecting just before we were due to have this lovely conversation, I was reflecting on kind of my reading habits and my general sort of Ramadan, and I realized I think I'm very very typical of a kind of, and I feel like I'm representing here like a North London Muslim, because I feel like with, you know what, if you grow up in a Muslim community, so if you're brought up in maybe sort of like northwest or east or south London, where you have like these lovely rich and vibrant Muslim communities, Allah Mubarak, I think Ramadan and generally your faith it plays a different role in your life. But coming as someone who didn't grow up in a Muslim community or any community of any sort, I kind of I discovered my faith a little later on in life. So that idea of it being an active endeavor came when I was a lot older. And so I kind of, in terms of studying my religion, I didn't look at it through a cultural lens. And I know that I read this really interesting article on Amali the other day about how someone's culture, like and by culture, I do mean like their ethnic culture, so like their home culture, how that helped them to rediscover their faith. And it was such a lovely perspective, because for me, it's always been the opposite. It's always been like, I've always seen religion as very separate to my culture, as in my home religion, my home culture, like my Pakistani South Asian culture has been very separate to how I view religion. And if anything, I think I draw more on my kind of British side of my culture in the way that I look at religion and the way that I read about religion in particular. So I do take a more kind of forensic, rigorous sort of scientific approach. And in saying that, I don't think South Asian approach should be approach to reading or rediscovering your faith through reading would be less rigorous or less scientific. But I know that definitely where I get that side is it's the British side of my culture. So in terms of reading, and how much time I put aside for reading, I do very much go back to the basics. So I do very much go through my tafsir. So every Ramadan I do the Ibn Kathir tafsir, and every Ramadan I do a different surah. I focus on something different. So I think last Ramadan or the Ramadan before that, I tried to do just Amma because I was memorizing at the time. And I just thought, in terms of your khushu for your salah, to be able to understand the context of each surah when you're reciting it, to me was phenomenal. Like it was a game changer. It changed my relationship with salah, which I think is obviously so integral to your religious identity and your religious sense of being. And so I think this year I haven't actually decided what tafsir I'm going to focus on. I did Fatiha last year, and I did a bit of Surah Baqarah last year, and I think this year I haven't decided what, but I do know I'm going to go return to my tafsir, and I'm going to. And the thing I love about tafsir is I think it and why I would encourage everyone to kind of rediscover Ibn Kathir, or go back to that part of your bookshelf that you maybe just kind of left up there for decoration for so long, is because I feel for me in particular, it really kind of brings home the kind of transcendental side of Islam and the divine sense of it. So the Quran is the word of Allah, right? But it's revealed through the Prophet ﷺ, who is human, and it's sent to shape our very human and material existence. And I think tafsir and hadith as a science really brings that home to me. It's this idea that, okay, it's these beautiful words that were sent by our creator who knows us, to direct and to shape our purpose, but they're made for us as humans, as such flawed beings. And that's what I love about tafsir. I love the fact that you have the human imprint of the Prophet ﷺ and how he received these surahs, but you have that beautiful sort of message in it. And that's my kind of, that is why I'm always rooting for tafsir at Ramadan. And actually it's something I do with my kids quite a lot, and it's something I'd encourage every parent to do with their child, because I feel like it really broadens your relationship with the Quran, and it really contextualizes it in such a way that I feel like nothing else could.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think, and it's important what you said, because sometimes we have those books sitting on our shelf for quite a while and they're getting dusty, and actually, how much of that, there's a wealth of knowledge and wealth of wisdom, and again, it's so beautiful that you then able to share that with your children. And I think it's really interesting what you said in terms of also the kind of the cultural impact or kind of influence, I guess, on faith or on Islam. I mean, I guess personally my then in that case experience is probably quite different to yours. I mean, definitely culture was always a big part of it, or and also, I mean, we lived for quite a while in like three generation household, and my late grandfather, paternal grandfather, it was such a blessing to have had him in the home, because the way he was then able to share stories with us, or the way he I guess kind of advised on practice, and all these things I guess you take from so many different people. But again, in terms of reading, there's a lot of and tafsir, absolutely, and there's so much, and I guess it's about contextualizing those stories, because otherwise they just become stories, don't they, or they just become like ayahs that we know, okay, that there's something happened, but it's about delving much deeper into it. I mean, is there a particular, I mean, without putting you on the spot, I mean, is there a particular surah or ayah that really not necessarily your favorite, but something you can think of now that is something you can come back to, has an impact on you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said, Marshall, about your grandfather. And I think that's so true. Like, I definitely do see like elements, like my grandfather with himself was like, he was probably the one figure in my life that was a kind of the religious Muslim in my life. Like at different parts of my upbringing, we had different sort of stages of like religious commitment and understandings and interpretations of Islam, but he was a kind of the constant in that regard. So I totally relate to that, subhanallah, and may Allah have mercy on both of them and bless them both. But in terms of what you were saying about what verse, so it's interesting because I've done a kids tafsir on Surah Asr. And I did it because my kids just love this story, and again, this is like, I suppose this in a way kind of conveys the breadth and the depth of tafsir and the whole science of understanding the Quran, and like the material and the sort of the transcendental aspects of it as well. There's a I really should know the name of the Sahaba, but I don't, and I'm ashamed of that. But I've got a link on my website actually. If anyone is wanting to do tafsir with their children over Ramadan, I think I've got one video and a couple of resources. So there's the option to kind of put them in front of the video if you want to do that, and there's an option to explore it yourself with your child. But the references and everything are in that video. And it's like there was one Sahaba, and he discovered that Islam was a true religion through the Surah Wal Asr, and that was because there was a person that was basically a false prophet called Musaylama, and he had heard that Wal Asr had been revealed, and he had asked this Sahaba, oh, what's the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saying? And the Sahaba had said, who at the time was a Muslim, he recited the verses of Wal Asr. And then Musaylima felt under great pressure, having received this revelation, that he should now say, okay, some revelation came to me. And he comes up with this verse about a wabr, which is like an animal. And it's really funny because it's like a really human moment as well, which is what I love about it. And the Sahaba looked at him and said, both you and I know that you're lying. And my kids love that because they find it so funny. They find the wabr thing hilarious, and they find the fact that he was kind of comedically just put to an end right there really quite funny as well. But also I think it's the beauty of Wal Asr, like that surah is such a beautiful surah. It's such a succinct and stunning surah, and I think I love that tafsir of that surah encompasses all of it, right? So it gives you the context, it gives you the human element, and it gives you the sheer beauty of Allah's words. So yeah, that's definitely a tafsir. I think if you ask my kids, that's definitely their favorite. In terms of my favorite, I think when I did Surah Fatiha last year, I can't remember the word, and this is the other reason I keep revisiting things, because insan forgets, right? Like and so I do revisit. But there was this one word in Surah Fatiha, and there was an explanation of why that word is in Surah Fatiha, and it really struck me because it made me realize, we repeat these words 5 times a day, like more than 5 times a day, as we do our salah, and the magnitude and the weight of them, we don't always reflect upon them, and we don't always know it. So I've done the tafsir of Surah Fatiha countless times in my journey as a Muslim, and revisiting it again at 35, I was like, subhanallah, that it struck me then, and that word, and now when I do, or after that, when I did salah, it held extra weight and it held extra significance, and that's the other reason that I love tafsir so much.
Yeah, no, and it's so nice to be able to kind of take that from you, because there is so much in terms of the surahs that we read, and what you said about some words holding weight, and definitely I think I recognize the days that I've looked at the tafsir and I've really kind of spent more time thinking about it. My salah really does transform. I mean, I guess in some ways, because that's the other thing, because there's part of our salah, maybe outside Ramadan, talking personally, things become a bit more ritualistic. It's like, okay, it's time for prayer, let me do wudu, let me do namaz, and then I'm kind of sometimes, I think, going through the motions, but I know on the days that I'm making a concise effort to be really present and think about the individual words, as much as the ones that I understand, or that in terms of translation. That you find that, I guess, sweetness in salah, which is so, I guess, important. And just you did mention the book that you have, the resources. So so I don't forget later, what is the name of the book, and if you can just mention the website so our listeners can access that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've written a children's picture book called The Best Dua. And that's a great Eid present, I should add.
Yes.
And you can get that on my and all my resources, and a lot of my writing actually is on my website. So it's www.muswellbooks.com.
Fantastic.
And I plug that mainly because genuinely, I truly believe, like, if you do tafsir as a family, it's transformational. Like, my kids look forward to Ramadan because in the evenings, like, well, I mean, I used to do bedtime stories with them. They're slightly older now, so we don't do bedtime stories anymore. But in Ramadan, I make the effort to sit and do just a couple of lines of tafsir with them before they go to sleep. And it's like, and that's what makes Ramadan so special to them, and their evolving sense of like what Ramadan means to them in their life, because then they have that, that it makes those nights so special to them. And I really like that, and I really value that. So I do wholeheartedly, and they're all free resources, I'm not trying to sell anything, wholeheartedly recommend that you take the time to do that with your kid. And generally, anyway, any Islamic learning you do, I think it's so lovely to share that with your child, because they get the sense of Islam being that kind of active thing where you're constantly, like we said, constantly refining yourself and constantly kind of renewing your relationship with Allah. And that's what we are as believers, right? You never give up. It's that constant endeavor. And I think modeling that to your child through your learning of Islam is such a beautiful way and key way to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And, and just to kind of echo what you're saying in terms of the books, obviously we have that book on our, I say our bookshelf, it's on the children's bookshelf, even though I'd like it to be on
Oh,
mine. But
oh, bless you.
but yeah, and obviously I remember how excited they were when like obviously I'd received I'd received it was mine, right? But the fact that it's just it's a cute little book, and the illustrations and everything about it, is just so lovely. And I think you're right. And this idea of collective reading and having that moment as a family, together, maybe, well, we usually, like you maybe like yourself, we do it at bedtime. Obviously it can be any part of the day, but I think,
Mm.
yeah, and obviously I think that comes back to idea of making an intention that you can have that part of a routine for Ramadan, and not in like like I'm pressurizing myself, there needs to be a routine, but as in, just introducing something that maybe if you haven't tried it before as a family, that's always quite nice. And I know my children really appreciate, even now that they're older, they still like either reading out aloud to me, or they like me reading out aloud to them, and kind of sharing that moment. So definitely, so that's the best for our book. So we are approaching the end of the first half of the book club show, and I am speaking to writer Mariya bint Rehan, and we've just been talking a little bit, obviously, about Ramadan, about intentions, and the impact, obviously, that all of the thinking and reflection has on the holy month. And we're going to continue. We're going to talk to Mariya about some of her own work in the second half of the show. So join us in a few moments. Assalamu alaikum.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the book club show on Inspire 105.1 FM. My name is Imrana Mahmood, and on today's show I am joined by writer Mariya bint Rehan. And in the first half we were talking a lot about our intentions for Ramadan, how we manage to reconnect and realign with our faith. And we'll talk a little bit about some reading habits and what the routine can potentially look like during Ramadan as well. Hopefully by the end of the show you're going to have maybe some ideas of how, or the intentions that you could potentially make, how it might be a wholesome, holistic way of spending the month. And of course, it will always be different for everybody, depending on our circumstances, but hopefully just some ideas. But now in the second half, I'm going to be speaking to Mariya about some of her own work that she's written. And we're going to start off with one of her most recent pieces, which is called A Cool Girl's Guide to Being a Muslim Mum. Now, I had the pleasure of reading it, and I want to read it again and again. I think it is one of those things that each bit, that there were different parts that I thought, oh God, I know exactly what this means. Or there was another bit which actually made me laugh out loud a little bit. So yeah, it's always wonderful reading Mariya's work. But yes, so I guess my first question, Mariya, really is, what prompted you to write A Cool Girl's Guide to Being a Muslim Mum?
Thank you for that. But so basically, how it came about was there's always, so I'm very much a Twitter girl. I should put that out there. I'm not going to turn this into confessional, but I am very much. I have a massive affection for Twitter and what it is as a platform, or what it is as like a social media app, or whatever, however you want to word it. Because I think it brings so many voices together, and it's just it's a really good temperature gauge. I think you get to know what people are thinking and what people are feeling in such an instant way. And there's this perennial topic of debate on Muslim Twitter, which is motherhood. This constant thing about, I've got nothing to do with motherhood. I never want to be a mother. Oh, it's the best thing. It's what defines me as a woman. And it's like, I feel like motherhood gets lost amongst all of that and more. That is the kind of white noise that exists around motherhood, and particularly Muslim mothers. And I think obviously the political weight of that alone is something, but generally as well, just the idea that we attach so much to motherhood and so little at the same time, and it's such a contradictory thing, and it's such a contested notion that I just thought, for those young girls who are like maybe starting out family, or maybe are in just had a child, and they've got all this kind of confusing white noise about what it means to be a Muslim mum, and all the significance that holds. I thought I just wanted to put something very simple and very concise together about motherhood doesn't define you as a woman, obviously, for obvious reasons, and it's not the defining trait of a Muslim woman. But very much like everything that that is to do with being a Muslim. It's very much about your circumstances and the position that you're in and how you utilize that to be the best believer. And this guide is just a guide on how, as a modern day British Muslim woman, all those things that are kind of that, you might feel the pressure to kind of conform to or to kind of submit to, how just to kind of navigate that as a young Muslim mum. And as someone who's now got my daughter, my oldest is turning 10 towards the end of this year, which is still quite difficult to say out loud. I felt like, I don't know, I've got a little bit more experience under my belt now, and I felt the need to kind of just extend a kind of rope to kind of young Muslim mums who are out there and just be like, it's okay, you've got this. And it's just a little sort of guide. And usually when I publish things, I do it on a platform. And with this piece, I kind of decided to kind of just do it as a standalone sort of I don't know, a little guide. So it kind of sits on its own. Actually, I need to upload that onto the website. That's a good reminder to myself. But it kind of sits on its own. It's not affiliated. I haven't put it on any sort of platform at the moment, just so that people can kind of access it on its own, in its own sort of category. And it's just something I thought I'd share with young mums, basically.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, and absolutely, I think it would bring so much value to young mums. But myself, as maybe not so much of a young mum, I mean, it was brilliant for me because sometimes and actually, I think in some ways you kind of reflect on that within the piece, because there's a sense we are seeking for a particular type of validation or some sort of recognition, and how our identity changes, like before motherhood and after. But I think for me, when reading it, it just gave me that sense of, that there's someone else out there who kind of understands, what motherhood means and what the ins and outs and the everydays of that kind of look like. And and I think, and to be honest, even aesthetically looking at it, it's just so nice, because I love all the kind of the flowers, and just generally just looking at it was so nice. But I guess my next question was, I'm just going to read a really little bit which comes under the section which is a secular gaze, which I found quite interesting. So there's a bit that says, so the great thing about being a Muslim mum is how motherhood complements and bolsters your faith, and how your faith complements and bolsters your ability to mother. It is one of the most real human experiences, one that will take you right down to the bone of what it means to exist and what we are all here for. That kind of realness in a superficial world has such great potential, and we've been given the exact tools as Muslims to make the absolute best of it, and the room to do that in a way that is true and forgiving to ourselves. So just for our listeners, this is the type of thing that I'm saying, right? Because within that one paragraph, I'm like, oh my God, there's so much, in there that you've captured. And I guess my first thing really is that just the ending where you're talking about being true and forgiving ourselves. What does that look like? Like, what is the sense of that when we talk about forgiveness, but for our own selves as mothers?
So I think it's like, so the way that I said it is, you've got this idea of what a Muslim mum should be like. So she should be entirely self-sacrificing and, not have any sort of, and, it's interesting because I don't know if I've included that in there, but I did want to write this whole thing about self-sacrifice, because I feel like it's a bit of a misnomer, because when you're compromising for your children, you're not compromising, you're learning a skill. So there isn't really obviously, and I think obviously this is all contextual naturally, because there are some women who aren't even given the space to do that, and it is a case of their health is impaired and everything. But in a general sense, I think that those things that you sacrifice for your child, they teach you, they give you a sort of temperance and a sort of resilience and a sort of selflessness and an ability to kind of look beyond yourself, that I don't actually think it doesn't really amount to sacrifice in the end. It's a skill and it's a enrichment that it gives us. And so there was that element of, like, when I say be forgiving to yourself, I mean that in the sense that you will get this idea of, as a Muslim mum, you should be this way. As a mum in general, you should be this way. And I think we have to really sort the wheat from the chaff amongst all that noise and really look at what it means to be a Muslim mum, and to do that from a position of compassion and mercy and not punishment. Don't punish yourself if you don't meet that milestone, subhanAllah. And that's the beauty of Islam. Like, it's so universal and so flexible at the same time. And by flexible, I don't mean that it doesn't adhere to certain scholarly sort of or strict principles. What I mean by that is that in Islam we have gender essentialist views. So as a woman, you are, as a woman, your role is given a certain weight, and you have that because of your identity as a woman. But there is forgiveness in that as well. So you have examples within the Sahaba of women who have been great warriors, for example, or have done certain things that wouldn't necessarily fit within the stereotypical confinements of what it means culturally in today's day and age. And so we're given, I think Islam gives us that room and that flexibility to understand where we are as women, but to not punish ourselves if we don't quite live up to certain social and cultural benchmarks. And I've always found that Islam has given me the greatest room to breathe as a mum, more than anything else has, more than cultural religious expectations have, more than social expectations have, more than like anyone else has. And I think that's what I kind of wanted to hammer home. Like, you know, like it is, being a mum will literally get you contemplating on what it means to be a human being, what it means to be breathing and to be alive, to be a soul, to be all of that. And, you know, Islam, subhanAllah, has given us the blueprint to do that in the best way. And I feel like motherhood has really, really refined my relationship with my religion, and my religion has really refined me as a mother. And I think that's the other reason I wanted to write this, because I feel like sometimes it's very, like, you know, the discourse can be very negative about motherhood, and it's not easy. It certainly isn't. It's tested me more than anything has ever tested me in my life. But there is so much barakah in it, and there's so much joy in it, and there's so much beauty in it that Allah has blessed us with. Not that society has. Like, we haven't got that from any other right or any other, you know. And I think it's just recognizing that, I suppose, as a Muslim woman.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, you talking a little bit there about, I mean, it's one of those things that I think freedom and liberty, yeah, that Islam's given me, I think, in terms of how I view motherhood is something, yeah, I don't think I've really thought about or received from anywhere else. And also, you know, I think what's really interesting is the way I used to view myself before I became a mother to now, and actually thinking, oh, okay, maybe I'm not as perfect as I thought, you know, because I think as a younger person, like you know, I thought, oh yeah, I'm such a patient person. Like, obviously we're talking about the ego here, right? And then suddenly discovering, you know, what you're talking about, compromise. I think it's so nice what you said in it being a skill, because yes, absolutely, because you are having to really control the ego which would naturally come into it. And actually, because you're also being an educator, you know, as a mother, you're being an educator, but also not, and I think there's a sense of, yes, you're educating your children, but by the same token, you're doing it for yourself as well. And yeah, and again, you know, having that sense of mercy and compassion on ourselves, because yeah, I mean, it's not easy. There's a reason that, you know, heaven, you know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that heaven lies at the feet of the mother, because there is a weight there, and you know, which you mentioned. Now just coming back to what you were saying a little bit about this idea of like white noise, and and you know, funny the fact that you say, you know, you're a bit of a Twitter girl, which I think maybe I am a little bit as well. I guess I'm wondering, what is it about social media and this kind of white noise that is then impacting this sense of what motherhood means, and how that might be affecting your individual kind of Muslim mums?
So I think it's like with anything. I think generally, I think we unfortunately we get our own. So I'm like a strong believer in the sense that I think you have like traditional cultural Islam, and that means different things to different people. So depending on what culture you've been brought up in, that will impress its version on Islam. And I think some of that isn't always what's the word, what's the best way to write this, isn't always in line with Islam. So for example, misogyny, we know misogyny doesn't exist in Islam, yet we come from, you know, a patriarchal world. I would say I don't think there is any culture out there. I remember reading one study about a non-patriarchal society out there somewhere, but generally speaking, we come from a patriarchal world, right? And so we will impress the misogynistic ideas into our cultural impressions of Islam, and then you have people that will kind of react to that false impression of Islam by asserting something else, and neither of those things are Islam. Not the cultural impression, and not the reactionary response to it. And I think the truth is the same with motherhood. So you've got this cultural idea of what motherhood and being a Muslim mother should be, and then you've got the reaction to it, like, oh no, knee jerk sort of, I'm just going to do the opposite of what you've said, because, you know, and I think neither of those are truly honor the role of motherhood in society and as a Muslim in within a kind of religious paradigm. And I think that was what I meant about white noise and social media. And I think, you know, you've got so many things popping up here and there about, you know, what Muslim women should be, and a lot of those are so cultural. And then you've got a lot of the response to that, which is like, and again, you know, it's interesting when we use the term cultural, we talk about cultural as though cultural consists of just minority culture, when it doesn't. Cultural can be Western, it can be liberal. So those kind of liberal Western sort of, that liberal Western culture has its impression of Islam, and the kind of, I don't know, global South, I don't know how could we term it, whatever else constitutes the minoritized community cultural sort of impressions of Islam. And I think it's about unpicking the true role of motherhood in Islam and being a woman in Islam outside of that, so it not being that sort of binary reactionary thing. And I think social media because of its nature, because it's very binary by nature, and because it's literally in the terms of its cogs and how it's constituted, it has a binary nature. It promotes that sort of binary thinking, and it kind of bolsters those binary views. And I think oftentimes we get caught in the crosshairs of that. And obviously we all know about echo chambers, and we all know about, going down that kind of rabbit hole of ideology where you're just stuck in one way of thinking. And I think social media does a really bad job, I think, of creating nuance where there should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also kind of I think triggers, like, that kind of reactive, impulsive kind of thoughts. And obviously we know the idea of keyboard warriors and all of this, and of course it loses nuance, and there's so much that's going on. So I think the idea of white noise really does kind of encapsulate I guess the point that you were making. And I think, to be honest, actually what we were just talking about, you mentioned misogyny and the things and the rabbit holes that people keep kind of falling into. It kind of takes us probably nicely into another article that you wrote quite recently, and I think you wrote it, it's on for Amalia, and it's called The Rise of the Muslim Incel, so ideological victim blaming and its harm to Muslim men and women. So again, I remember reading this near the end of last year, and obviously it just being really, really relevant. And of course, it's still, even now, where we are seeing a rise of certain, that, I guess, part of that ideology has always been, has always existed, but it almost feels like it's got this momentum, particularly online. So I guess for our listeners, could you just start by explaining what exactly is meant by kind of the word incel? I guess that might be a good place to start. And then again, what kind of prompted you to want to write this piece?
Yeah, so I think incel comes from the term involuntary celibate, and it was this movement that from what I understand, began in white Christian America, where these men felt sort of incensed by the fact that they weren't given access to women as and when according to their own whims. And so they created this movement, which is defined by its misogyny and very much online based, which kind of was just shamelessly misogynistic and very anti-female. And it's kind of this victim mentality of, okay, the world is privileging. It's quite funny actually, privileges women and female rights, and men have been downtrodden, and we need to hark back to this kind of 1950s notion of masculinity, or even prior to that, like an older time masculinity. And it kind of has gained a lot of momentum, and it's kind of grown exponentially. Kind of mainly the catalyst of that has been kind of the social media influencing sort of sector industry that has come out of as a result, and it's kind of found its way. So they call it the manosphere. It's like this online male movement, and it's kind of found expression in a kind of Muslim corner of the internet as well. So unfortunately, we've now got this kind of burgeoning movement, which I think is, if we're being perfectly honest, is motivated by financial incentive. Like, I think these, clickbait and having this kind of media empire is an incredibly lucrative thing now. And so you have a lot of people who would otherwise be insignificant voices being able to build really large platforms for themselves simply by parroting anti-female talking points, and in particular within the Muslim community to kind of adopt Islam into that kind of anti-female. And it's interesting because it relies very heavily on false stereotypes of Islam. So this idea that Islam is inherently misogynistic, that the Muslim alpha male exists in the way that they describe it to be. And what angers me about it, and why I wrote about it, was because it is absolutely antithetical to the tradition of our Prophet ﷺ, in every sense of the word. And if we're emulating anyone, in terms of masculine ideals, it should be the Prophet ﷺ, who showed nothing but compassion and mercy towards women, who had no qualms about crying, who was the epitome of humanity. And we are going around following men with microphones who are claiming that they are taking us back to an Islamic tradition that never existed in the first place. So it's a real, to be perfectly honest, it's a real sore point for me. It's not something I like thinking about. It gives me a headache, literally physically thinking about it. But the reason I wrote that article is because I felt like no one else would, from the position that I think it needs to be written about. So I don't feel like, there are conversations that I feel that we can have within our community and outside of our community. And this is very much our community conversation. This is about the conversations we need to be having in a safe space about how we navigate out of this problem that we seem to have got ourselves into. And so writing in itself was a risk to me, because I feel very protective over the Muslim community in terms of what we put out there and what is available to public scrutiny, because so much is scrutinized about the Muslim identity. And there are issues that I think that we need to unpack within ourselves. And so writing that was a bit of if it was a really odd position to be in, because nobody wants to add further criticism to the Muslim man. The Muslim man is already wholly vilified in globally, and I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to do that to our brothers. But there is a faction within the Muslim male community that I think needs to be called out purely on the basis of its falsehood. And I mean, you know, and it's such a deep and like it's such a difficult thing to discuss, and it's such a difficult thing to do with sensitivity, with the sensitivity that it requires. So my writing that was really out of a place of sheer frustration, because I just felt someone needs to call out the fact that not only does this movement exist, but when we look at how feminism is viewed relationally, like you look at feminism and it's considered this thing, okay, women are influenced. Like when you look at red pill, it's seen as women are creating the red pill movement rather than men are being poorly influenced by other men, in the same way that feminism is deemed women being corrupted by other women, if you see what I mean. And I think it's this inability to see men as morally fallible that I think is really quite dangerous, because we shouldn't be propagating any view that men aren't religious equals to us, because in terms of our religious and our spiritual, the same laws that apply to men as believers apply to women as believers. So in terms of our moral and spiritual health, we are absolute equals. So for you to say that women are adversely influenced spiritually and that men can't be is an incredibly dangerous thing to advocate, I say.
Definitely. And I think there is, you know, I mean, I feel that sense of, I guess, frustration, and also almost like this idea that there's like a looming danger somewhere, because there's so much that's going on. And I think that's what's so great, the fact that you obviously wrote this article, because there was also this sense of no one's really saying anything, like other Muslim men. I mean, there was some, of course, but when you think about our kind of faith leaders, or, you know, spiritual leaders, you know, what is going on and what you know, because it was almost for me, you know, online or wherever it was the women who were speaking up. And but again, you know, that's, you know, like you said, there's a risk even in that, because you're probably going to get hounded by the very movement that you're, you know, kind of speaking about. And for anybody who may be, you know, listening, you know, obviously the red pill is obviously in reference to, you know, the movie, you know, The Matrix, and that's obviously where it comes from. But I guess, you know, I'm also wondering, in terms of, you know, this piece in particular that you wrote, The Rise of the Muslim Incel, what are you kind of hoping should now kind of be happening, like, because it's still happening. We you know, there's all these men who seemingly you kind of converting to Islam but still holding on to certain misogynistic views, and they're just being welcomed with open arms without any sort of or sense of accountability. And of course I understand there's a sense of when someone converts and what obviously that means, but at the same time we know that the accountability doesn't necessarily just disappear. So what do you think kind of needs to ideally happen next, or is there anything?
You know, one of the beauties of Islam is like this. So if you look at Sharia, your public sins and your private sins are dealt with in very different ways. So like your relationship with insan, or with your fellow creation, is different to the sin that you may commit in relationship to Allah. So, you know, in terms of like with reverts, we accept reverts irrespective of anything, because what's between them and Allah, only Allah knows, and we can only really assume that they are Muslim, and that comes from a prophetic tradition. But I think it's the public nature of it that I think as Muslims we need to be sensible, and we need to take from our prophetic tradition and understand that, firstly, if you are a new revert to Islam, if we're looking at it from in a very pragmatic sense, no way should we be sticking a camera or a microphone in your face for a number of reasons, on the basis of your race, because I think essentially that's what happens. We have this kind of colonialized mindset where if someone from an external ethnicity reverts into our religion, we kind of hold them up on the basis of their race alone. And I think, again, it's a colonized mindset. So that shouldn't happen for that reason. It shouldn't happen because those people need time and space as human beings who are accepting a new religion to you know, to understand that religion and embody that religion before we start putting them on platforms and taking everything that they say as like sacred. So I think there's a number of issues, and I think it really exemplifies how like, I suppose the disconnect, I think we're so disconnected from our religion in a real sort of material and literal sense. Like, we don't know the letter of our religion. And this is, again, going back to what I was saying earlier about going back to the basics for me, why I go back to series, because I feel like we don't know the basics of our religion. And oftentimes you have, alhamdulillah, we have a great, you know, tradition of imams and mosques in the UK. They're not perfect, but I don't think we can expect anything to be. But naturally, those imams are of a different generation, and they might not necessarily understand, A, the challenges of the everyday Muslim on the street, and B, what the social media exposure is. And so you've got this massive disconnect where you've got this kind of vacuum. We're all kind of navigating this space without any religious guidance, without any sort of expertise, spiritual or faith expertise at all. And I think that's why you have this kind of this vacuum has been filled by these self-professed social media influencers who are like taking on the flag of of modern day British Muslim Islam, what it should look like, ironically according to these kind of archaic ideas that don't actually exist either in Western tradition or Islamic tradition. This idea of like a 1950s housewife, the 1950s, that was a farce. Like, it never, that this ideal that they're harking back to doesn't exist anywhere other than in their minds. And I think it's easy to sell a false promise, and it's easy to live in a city of nostalgia or in your dreams, because then you don't have to deal with the real problems of the world. And that's the issue. We don't have enough people dealing with the real problems of the world. And that's why as Muslims, we are overwhelmingly, I think 50% of our households are in poverty. We have poorer outcomes in terms of our health, our housing, and these are issues that we should be addressing as a Muslim community from a place of faith, and not playing this, not kind of having these conversations about gender where they're not necessarily relevant or instructive, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things that there's so much, I guess there's so much out there that we're trying to work through. And it's really interesting because in terms of all the kind of personalities that we're having to deal with, and the online presence and things that you've mentioned, I mean, I don't know, I guess it can sometimes feel overwhelming, but that's why it was so important, I think, when you wrote the particular piece. There was, for me anyway, kind of filling this gap of really trying to articulate what the issue is and the importance of wanting to call it out as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. So for our listeners, that is Mariya bint Rehan, and we were just talking about the rise of the Muslim incel, ideological victim blaming, and its harm to Muslim women and men. And before that, we were talking about Mariya's piece, which was a cool girl's guide to being a Muslim mum. So I hope you've really enjoyed the show, because we're just coming towards an end. Hopefully, inshallah, it's given a little bit of an idea of for Ramadan, some reading that you can do, some things that you can reflect on, inshallah. And please, obviously, do definitely order the best dua, whether it's an Eid gift or maybe something for during Ramadan. And you can also visit the website muswellbooks.com, which is MUSWELL books.com. Thank you so much, Mariya, for your time today. It's been an absolute joy speaking to you. And inshallah, is there anything else in the pipeline that we can now look forward to?
Not at the moment, but I'm sure. I mean, I'm constantly publishing. I'm constantly writing. So inshallah, you'll see if you follow me on either Instagram or Twitter, then inshallah you'll see my stuff come up. Inshallah.
Fantastic. And can you just share the social media handles?
Sure. So well, it's probably best to follow me on Instagram. I'm at Muswell Books, so it's nice and easy to remember.
Fantastic. That sounds good. Okay, so I'll be back inshallah with a new show and a different author, and we'll be delving more into reading as well. So we will see you then, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.